Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from Chapter 320. Chapter 320. When the troops reached their night's halting place on the 8th of November, the last day of the Krasno battles, it was already growing dusk. All day it had been calm and frosty, with occasional lightly falling snow, and toward evening it began to clear. Through the falling snow, a purple-black and starry sky showed itself, and the frost grew cleaner. An infantry regiment, which had left Tarutino, 3,000 strong, but now numbered only 9,000, was one of the first to arrive that night at its halting place, a village on the high road. The quartermasters who met the regiment announced that all the huts were full of sick and dead Frenchmen, cavalrymen, and members of the staff. There was only one hut available for the regimental commander. The commander rode up to his hut. The regiment passed through the village and stacked its arms in front of the last huts. Like some huge, many-limbed animal, the regiment began to prepare its lyre and its food. One part of it dispersed and waded knee-deep through the snow into a birch forest to the right of the village, and immediately the sound of axes and swords, the crashing of branches, and merry voices could be heard from there. Another section amid the regimental wagons and horses, which were standing up in a group, was busy getting out cauldrons and rye biscuit and feeding the horses. A third section scattered through the village, arranging quarters for the staff officers, carrying out the French corpses that were in the huts, and dragging away boards, dry wood, and thatch from the roofs for the campfires, or wattle fences to serve for shelter. Some 15 men with merry shouts were shaking down the high wattle wall of the shed, the roof of which had already been removed. "Now then, all together, shove!" cried the voices, and the huge surface of the wall, sprinkled with snow and creaking with frost, was seen swaying in the gloom of the night. The lower stakes cracked more and more, and at last the wall fell, and with it the men who had been pushing it. Loud, coarse laughter and joyous shouts ensued. "Now then, catch hold in twos! Hand up the lever! That's it! Where are you shoving to?" "Now, all together! But wait a minute, boys, with a song!" All stood silent, and a soft, pleasant, velvety voice began to sing. At the end of the third verse, as the last note died away, 20 voices roared out at once, "Ooh, ooh, ooh! That's it, all together! Heave away, boys!" But despite their united efforts, the wattle hardly moved, and in the silence that followed, the heavy breathing of the men was audible. "Here, you of the 6th Company, devils that you are, lend a hand, will you? You may want us one of these days." Some 20 men of the 6th Company, who were on their way into the village, joined the haulers, and the wattle wall, which was about 35 feet long and 7 feet high, moved forward along the village street, swaying, pressing upon and cutting the shoulders of the gasping men. "Get along! Falling? What are you stopping for? There now!" Many senseless words of abuse flowed freely. "What are you up to?" Suddenly came the authoritative voice of the sergeant major, who came upon the men who were hauling their burden. "There are gentry here. The general himself is in that hut. And you foul-mouthed devils, you brutes, I'll give it to you!" shouted he, hitting the first man who came his way with a swinging blow on the back. "Can't you make less noise?" The men became silent. The soldier who had been struck groaned and wiped his face, which had been scratched till it bled by his falling against the wattle. "There, How the devil hits out! He's made my face all bloody, said he in a frightened whisper when the sergeant major had passed on. Don't you like it? Said a laughing voice, and moderating their tones, the men moved forward. When they were out of the village, they began talking again as loud as before, interlarding their talk with the same aimless expletives. In the hut which the men had passed, the chief officers had gathered and were in animated talk over their tea about the events of the day and the maneuvers suggested for tomorrow. It was proposed to make a flank march to the left, cut off the vice-king, Murat, and capture him. By the time the soldiers had dragged the wattle fence to its place, the campfires were blazing on all sides, ready for cooking. The wood crackled, the snow was melting, the black shadows of soldiers flitted to and fro all over the occupied space where the snow had been trodden down. Axes and choppers were plied all around. Everything was done without any orders being given. Stores of wood were brought for the night. Shelters were rigged up for the officers, cauldrons were being boiled, and muskets and accoutrements put in order. The wattle wall the men had brought up was set up in a semicircle by the 8th Company as a shelter from the north, propped up by musket rests, and a campfire was built before it. They beat the tattoo, called the roll, had supper, and settled down round the fires for the night, some repairing their footgear, some smoking pipes, and some stripping themselves naked to steam the lice out of their shirts. And that concludes my reading of chapter 320 of War and Peace. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 320. Force and Fatalism. The genius of Tolstoy's prose is that its natural realism, rollicking in freedom yet unadorned by style, grounds the reader in a seductive simplicity that masks the subtle introduction of his themes. Today, for instance, we join the Russian soldiers at camp. Tolstoy draws us in by means of his description of keen frost, falling snow, and purple-black starry sky. With his words, one can feel the crunch of winter ground, the chill leaping down the throat with each breath, and the sharp mental perception born of the shock from the cold. From here, it's an easy invitation into the world of the working soldiers. We're with them as they cajole and curse and make merry and prepare their camp. All the while, secretly hovering above it all, is a central question in Tolstoy's theory of history. How is it the awesome freedom of the masses is subjugated to the terrible truth of historical determinism? This question is dramatized today in the interaction between the Russian soldiers and the officer corps. The infantry regiment boasts roughly 900 soldiers. Once they arrive at their halting place for the night, they get to work preparing camp. Some go to get firewood, some go get food. Others tend to a scattered array of duties. Tolstoy describes these soldiers as a huge, many-limbed animal. The officer corps, on the other hand, file into a small hut and start sipping tea and talking with one another. Their conversation is interrupted, however, by the rude explicatives of the laboring soldier class outside. To remedy this impropriety, the officers send one of their own out to correct this poor behavior. The officer's method of correction, by means of a swift blow to the back of a single soldier, is the employment of Gibbon's inflexible maxim of Roman discipline, that a good soldier should dread his officers far more than his enemy. It gets the job done. The soldiers continue quietly with their work, leaving the officers free to sip their tea in peace. What is so striking about this scene is that the officers fit into a single hut, while the strength of the common soldiers is such that they can move a wattle fence 35 feet long and 7 feet high through uncomfortable winter conditions with energy to spare. How easy it would be for them to revolt, manor farm style, against the sometimes cruel rule of their superiors. Yet they don't. Why? This is in part the question Tolstoy tries to answer in the historical discourses of War and Peace. What, he asks, is the animating force that powers the sweep of history? Daily meditation. Nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the easiness with which the many are governed by the few, and the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers. When we inquire by what means this wonder is effected, we shall find that, as force is always on the side of the governors have nothing to support them but opinion. It is therefore on opinion only that government is founded, and this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as to the most free and most popular. David Hume, Essays Moral, Political, and Literary. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 320 of War and Peace, concluding with that rare David Hume quote. Gotta love it. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the description. Also in the description, you're going to find links to my Amazon wishlist for books and movies. If you decide to support me by purchasing one of those, we'll set up a Zoom call or something to discuss that book or that movie. At any rate, your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 321 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.